Hey everybody, so this little video did this repair I did a little while back on a bike that had of the 4 water bottle the little threaded inserts there. One of them had a bolt that was broken off in there, and then on another one the nut itself was broken off internally. So there's some little tips on how to remove and put new ones in. First thing, what I didn't do here that you may want to do is put some masking tape around the paint there so it doesn't scratch the paint there. But anyway, so what I'm doing here, I've got my little Dremel tool with a cutoff wheel, and I'm just kind of keeping the radius of the wheel centered into the center part of the rivnut there. So it's essentially a little flanged, and what I'm doing is the center part of the flange there, I'm getting it as thin as possible so it will basically just break away with pretty minimal effort. Sometimes if those are really stripped and they want to spin around, you have to you have to do something like this. If you try to drill it, it just spins within the frame there, so you can't drill them out sometimes. So anyway, had it just the flange there so thin it just knocked it in and fell into the frame there. So this is the other one that's on the seat tube, and the actual rivnut is broken in half, so the threaded section's still in there, but it just turns and it won't get tight. So this was another little thing where you can't really drill it because the bolt itself will just spin. So what I did here was just cut off the head of the bolt, and from there that'll just push through into the frame, and then the flange, I basically repeated the same process and just went straight up on top of the flange and thinned that metal out so I could basically on this one I had to fold it up in there. But one thing you're not going to see here is basically I was able to get both of these pieces out by taking the seat post out, and then the one that's in the seat tube here, just flip the bike upside down and the pieces will fall right out there. And then in the down tube piece that we knocked just in there before, you just got to pull the stem, the handlebar stem, the forks out, and then tip the bike forward, and it'll fall right out through the front of the head tube there. So it's not super difficult to do, but you do have to do a little bit of bike disassembly there. Nothing too major, but that's basically what's going to be involved. So typically the reasons that these will fail like that or come loose is if that's one thing, just periodic maintenance. You might check the bolts that hold your water bottle cages on and make sure they're actually tight, because sometimes if they get loose, it'll basically just kind of stretch out the flange and then the little mushroomed area. I'll get into that here in just a bit, show you a little drawn up diagram of what it looks like from inside of there. But it'll work itself loose over time, and then the looser it gets, if you just let it go, it'll actually wear through and make a really large hole in your frame and cause some pretty serious damage there. So that's one thing. Just make sure that those are tight. Sometimes in a crash they can damage them and crack them loose if it doesn't damage the frame. But anyway, here I'm just since the bottom mushroom was still in there and I couldn't really hammer it, there was nothing really to hammer it in on. I just basically folded up the edge of the flange here enough to, it was pretty pliable when you get it that thin. So just fold up the edges of the flange and just push it on through the frame there once it's small enough to fit through the hole. I think we're pretty much there here, so just take my punch and a little edge to knock onto, and wasn't too much of an effort there. So we got that one in. That's the two pieces once I pulled them out. That's the piece that was on the down tube, and then that's the piece that we well, maybe that's backwards. I think that's the piece that was in the down tube, and the other one was the one we cut off there. But either way, so this is what a new rivnut looks like. Some of them are aluminum, some are steel. This is a steel one that's zinc coated. You can kind of see the difference there. Is, you know, the top flange piece we've cut off, and you can see where the little piece mushroomed up. But basically the way these work, just imagine if this is your the edge of your tube that has the hole in it, so either the top of the down tube or the front side of your seat tube, and there'll be a hole in the frame, and then this would be the represent the flange of the little rivnut. It just drops straight in there. And then this portion here, it's kind of a double-walled piece of metal, and it's threaded through the center. And as you either put a bolt or something, or your rivnut setter tool, it'll pull that bottom end up to this high, and it'll fold the metal around the top part there. Basically, it sandwiches the frame between the flange and, you know, these two little mushroom pieces, and then the threads will end up right in here. So yeah, just, you know, letting those get loose, it can open up a gap where this little sandwich piece doesn't pull together. As long as those bolts are tight, it's always going to be sandwiched up there. And you know, once that thing works loose, it'll just, you know, it can be difficult to tighten the bolts because the whole rivnut assembly will just spin around in the frame, make it difficult to drill out and things like that. So that's why I just take the Dremel tool and, you know, go through the top so it doesn't cause the little rivnut to spin. This is the tool we use at the shop. I'll put a link for one of these. It's the little Marson metric rivnut setter tool there. You just basically thread that on, get it chucked up to where the threads go all the way through, and this is just a little homemade version that I have in my toolbox, just a bolt with some spacers where that can pull up through there, and you just thread your rivnut through, and I'll usually hold the silver spacer, the big spacer there, with some pliers or something, and just tighten that till it's cinched down up in there. So that's the Marson tool, and you basically just slip it in there and squeeze it, and from there it pulls the threads directly up, cinches that in place. Sometimes you have to do it thread it back down in there and give it another little squeeze, but that's essentially it. From there you got your new rivnut in there, and just make sure you get those water bottle bolts tight. So yeah, that's going to do it for this one, and thanks for watching. If you're not already a subscriber, please consider subscribing, and see you next time.